Heard they be counting me out, I'm loading I'm writing down names, I'm making a list, I'm checking it twice and I'm getting them.
Who she wanna fight? Who wearing a weave? Who doing your Burke bag is fake? Who holding the key?
What up guys, it's your boy Ali and welcome to Hip Hop Forever. Now before we get started, make sure to add me on IG. I haven't been promoting that at all, but you know what they say, it's better late than never. I'll be doing some giveaways on IG. You can also request videos there as well. Let's get started. Now the 90s was a great time for hip hop. A lot of people consider that time period to be the golden age of hip hop. It gave birth to a huge number of dope MCs. I'm talking Jay-Z, Eminem, Pac, Biggie, DMX, and the list goes on. Honestly, the 90s to early 2000s is my favorite era of hip hop. I have nothing against today's music. A lot of it is pretty catchy and more melody focused. A lot of rappers sing now, whereas back then singing was not the norm. In fact, the rapper that sang was usually perceived to be soft.
I'm back in the game, shawty, the rule and conquer. You sing for hoes and sound like the Cookie Monster.
So I like the fact that hip hop has evolved. Every generation of artists takes hip hop to a higher place. However, when it comes to pure bars, lyrics, if we're talking about the ability to put words together in a way that tells a story, if we're talking about complex metaphors and punchlines, then it's clear that this generation cannot fuck with the rappers that came out in the 90s and early 2000s. Rappers back then were more competitive. You couldn't just call yourself the king of New York without putting the work in. You couldn't just record a song on your laptop, upload it to YouTube or SoundCloud, and blow up the way Designer did. You actually had to prove yourself. Also, street credibility was very important, and the game had no room for soft rappers. With that being said, would Drake, J. Cole, and Kendrick make it if they came out in the 90s? Now let's start off by saying that if Drake, Kendrick, and Cole existed in the 90s, their skill set would adapt to that time period. Back then, 808s weren't as important as they are today. I feel like that hard-knocking 808 saves a whole lot of rappers' careers. So imagine Drake, Kendrick, and Cole rapping over Dr. Dre's beats, Timbaland, Pharrell, etc.
Sitting in the studio thinking about which move will go right now. Freestyle or write down, whatever.
Now let's start off with Drake, right? Would Drake make it if he came out in the 90s? Now we all know Drake has that nice guy persona. He's the guy that backed out of the Pusha T beef because he didn't want to hurt his good guy image. Now let's take a second to talk about every Sim's favorite one-hit wonder. I'm talking about Eamon. Now for those of you that don't know, Eamon is a singer that came out in the early 2000s. He released a song called Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back that blew up.
Fuck what I said, it don't mean shit now. Fuck the presents, might as well go home now.
And off the strength of that one song, Eamon got to release an album called I Don't Want You Back in 2004. The album came in at number 7 on the Billboard 200 and sold 106,000 copies in the first week. Now why is Eamon so significant? Well, because Eamon to me is basically Drake light. Drake and Eamon both come from non-threatening areas in their city. Drake is from Toronto and Eamon is from Staten Island. Both artists make sensitive music and their target demographic largely consists of women.
Have you heard the news? There's a new Drake song.
The song I Don't Want You Back deals with the topic of infidelity. A guy found out his girl was cheating on him and it became so sensitive that it moved him to tears. For that one song, Eamon mastered the art of putting sensitivity into his music and profiting from it. He did it well. In my opinion, Eamon is the archetype for Drake. Their image is identical. However, the only thing that separates Eamon from Drake is the fact that he can't rap. Now Eamon came out in a time when people weren't really feeling that sensitive stuff. Hip-hop was still more street-oriented and gritty, and that's only 2004. Now after the hype for Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back died down, Eamon's career took a nosedive. Apart from that one song, people weren't really feeling his other stuff. It was too sensitive, emotional, and in a way, it was ahead of its time. In the 90s, hip-hop was more hardcore because several rappers actually lived the life that they talked about on records. It was more street. Sensitivity was seen as a weakness back then, so an artist like Drake would have a hard time establishing a lane within the culture back then. He'd be considered too sensitive. And the fact that he can't freestyle would not be a good look back then.
Tell me what it do, I belong to the youngest Grammy-nominated crew.
In that era, freestyling off the dome was the norm. Some of them would spit writtens, but rappers wouldn't rap off their notepad on air because that would have been career suicide. Drake did it and he got away with it, but I don't think he would have been so lucky in the 90s. Another question comes to mind. What if people found out that Drake was using a ghostwriter back then? Drake would get crucified by the hip-hop audience. To cut a long story short, Drake just wouldn't make it because that time period was way too cutthroat, more street and competitive for a rapper like Drake to exist. Now let's talk about J. Cole and Kendrick. Now I've been listening to J. Cole and Kendrick for a long time. Both of them are lyrical rappers. When you listen to their music, you can tell that they take took the time to make sure that every one of their bars makes sense. They aren't rhyming for the sake of rhyming. In today's hip-hop climate, J. Cole and Kendrick are already considered by some as GOATs. But the question is, if J. Cole and Kendrick released an album in the 90s, what would have happened? Now to me, there are times when J. Cole and Kendrick fall into the conscious rap lane.
I'm African, I'm black as the moon, heritage of a small village, part of my residence.
They both rap about social change, something that Drake completely ignores, and at times they both try to educate the masses through their music. With that being said, if J. Cole or Kendrick came out in the 90s, there's a good chance that they would not be as big as they are today. Kendrick has a better shot at making it than Cole, because in my opinion, J. Cole lacks the image that was popular. Tupac was all over the radio, Biggie, Jay-Z, these rappers had that street image to them and people respected them for it. If we're going off image alone, then Cole and Kendrick have a slim chance of making it in the 90s. However, there is one thing that could possibly save them, and that's their lyrical ability. There's a good chance Kendrick and Cole would have fallen into that conscious rapper lane. Talib Kweli comes to mind, Common, Black Thought, and Mos Def. I believe that if Cole and Kendrick came out in the 90s, their competition would be other conscious rappers. So yes, I do believe that J. Cole and Kendrick would survive in the 90s. However, I don't think that they would be rappers at the top of the game, because back then being lyrical was normal. One of the reasons why Kendrick and Cole blew up the way they did is because they came up in a time when rappers focused more on melodies than lyrics. 808s were popping and the beats carry a lot of these rappers. A lot of rappers weren't saying anything in their music. So when Kendrick and Cole came into the game, they almost came in as saviors of hip-hop. They are mainstream and they can rap. The fans gravitated towards Kendrick and Cole because they were different from the status quo. But that's only partly because they came up in an era when lyricism wasn't in favor. The fans expected lyricism, but what they also wanted was an artist with a story and one that stood for something. In essence, I believe Kendrick is the one that has the best chance of making it. He actually grew up in the streets. He would be around gang members even though he wasn't in a gang himself. That's already a very intriguing backstory, and that's something that Drake and J. Cole do not have. J. Cole would probably fall into that Talib Kweli lane like I said earlier, or Common. He does have a shot of making it back then, but Drake on the other hand has none. That's it for me, man. It's your boy Ali. Do you think Drake, Kendrick, and Cole would have made it in the 90s? Let me know down below. Also, if you haven't done so by now, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That's it for me, man. Catch you next time. Peace.